working in thick textured surface. But you've got different rendering styles that you can view for whatever reason you might need. You've got translucent surface, so if you need to see through the garment and through to the body, you can see through it with that option. We're going to have a look now at the mesh. So let's select the mesh from the garment rendering style. And now our t-shirt turns into the mesh. And this is what the computer builds our fabric as. And you see there's these triangles that make up our fabric. And at the minute, they're quite big. And it's the default that Clo gives us for our garments. So if I select one of my pattern pieces, and I can either do this in the 2D or the 3D pattern window. To deselect, just click anywhere in any gray space, either in the 3D or the 2D window. So I can select my pattern, the center front of my t-shirt in the 2D window, and it selects it in the 3D window for me as well. It corresponds. So now if I go over to the right-hand side, we have two windows that we will end up using a lot once we start making garments. We have an object browser, which has things like your fabrics, your graphics, your buttons, your buttonholes, top stitching, puckering, trims, grading, POM, points of measure. So there's lots of things that we can control and keep track of in this object browser here. So if we have several fabrics, they will all end up sitting in this library here. If we have several graphics, they will end up sitting here, and so on for the next selections. Let's open up the property editor as well, and that comes up underneath, and you should be able to make it a little bit bigger, or we can just close the object browser altogether just so that we see the property editor. So in here, we're basically seeing all the information of our 2D pattern. So we need to select a pattern piece first, and then we go down and we can see some different sections and the information that this pattern piece has selected to it. And there are things that we can change, like elastic, seam taping, shearing, and we get down into simulation properties, and we have particle distance, which it should be set to millimeters. And the default is always 20. And that means that there's 20 millimeters, there's 20 particles per centimeter that's giving us the mesh or the grid. And if we change that, let's click in here and take it down to 10, for example, and hit enter. You should see the mesh get smaller on your t-shirt, on that pattern piece that we've selected. And we can zoom out a little bit just to see how much it's changed compared to the sleeve. And you can imagine when the mesh is much smaller, the detail of the fabric is a lot better. It's improved because there's less points that the fabric is moving on, or the simulation of the fabric. It's of course digital, but there's less points for it to move across. So you're giving it a more smooth surface to move against. So you're getting a lot more detail. It's a lot more realistic. When you start working on garments, you can work on selecting specific parts of your garment and taking the particle distance down to certain numbers. So if I select the two pieces of my neck trim, for example, it's such a small pattern piece, I need a much lower particle distance, because if we have a look at what the mesh looks like, the grid is so big that it's not going to give me a really nice finished look to my trim. So I'm actually going to take that particle distance down to 5. You can take it down to as low as 3, and it will still work. The more pieces that you have in your project at one time that you take the particle distance down, the heavier and the more work it is for your computer. So really be wise when you're working on really specific garments of only taking your small pattern pieces down in the particle distance and keeping the other pattern pieces that you don't need to, that are not so small, that you don't need too much detail on, take them down to 10 or 15, and your computer will thank you for it. So you see already the difference between the 20 and the 5. There's so much more detail. So even when I go back into simulation, that trim should sit a lot nicer and a lot more realistic now because I've changed the particle distance. And you don't need to change the particle distance and have the mesh view on. You can do it without seeing the mesh, but it's quite good to have it on so you can kind of see the difference, and also when you come around to teaching your students, show them how that works and how it allows the fabric to drape a lot better. So let's take sleeve down to 10. So you see immediately the front is 20, my sleeve is 10 particle distance, and then my trim is now 25. Could take it down to 3 if I wanted it to be even smoother. This t-shirt, it looks like it's got linked editing because I only changed the particle distance to one of my sleeves. And if you do the same, you'll probably see that this happens as well, but it's changed it on both of my sleeves, which means that my pattern has linked editing, which means I only need to do something to one side of my garment and it happens on the other side automatically, which is a really cool feature in Clo3D. Okay, so that's the mesh. Let's go back to the thick textured surface, garment rendering style. Let's get a good view of our patterns and let's just have a look what's happening in the file. So let's press number 2 to get the basic front view of our avatar. And let's have a look what we have in our 2D pattern window. So we have a front, back, 2 sleeves, and we have our neck. They've for some strange reason made the neck tape or the neck binding out of 3 pieces. Sometimes people do strange things in Clo3D when they're not garment designers. I'm actually going to take my baselines off because I don't want to see my baselines. I don't need to see them. So I'm going to go back up to garment display and I'm going to tick select off, show my baselines. Just so I see the t-shirt empty. I want to select all of the pattern pieces. So to do that, I can do that in 2 different ways. I can draw a marquee box by having a good view of all of my pattern pieces, so starting in one top or bottom corner, it doesn't matter where, and clicking and dragging, making sure you encompass all of your pattern pieces. And when you do that, all of your pattern pieces are selected. This doesn't work in Clo if you draw a marquee box and you stop your marquee box in the middle of a pattern. I did that just now on my center front piece and it won't select the pattern piece. You need to make sure you're drawing around the full pattern piece for it to get selected. Or you can press and hold shift and just click each pattern piece you want to select them all. So there's a couple of different ways that you can select pattern pieces. Let's go over to the 3D window and right click, and we're going to reset the 2D arrangements. So select all of the pattern pieces. Once they're selected, they should be highlighted in yellow. And then over in the 3D space, right click anywhere on the yellow highlighted pattern pieces and select Reset 2D Arrangement. And the patterns will look something like this. If you can't see the lines, which are the sewing lines, it's not a problem because I'm actually going to switch them off in a second, but it's up in your garment display and it's show threads. So if I deselect that, which I'm going to do to rearrange them, I don't see them anymore. The garment is sewn together, so there's threads attaching it, and those lines are sewing lines and threads. So I'll do that again. So I'm going to select all of my pattern pieces in the 2D window. I'm going to come over to the 3D space, right click, and reset 2D arrangement. When they are still selected, just zoom out a little bit and use your gizmo, which is the round dial that comes up in the 3D window to help you move objects. There should be a yellow square, and if not, you can use the arrows to move it around. But the yellow square just allows a little bit more freedom of movement. So we're just going to put them out of the way in anywhere above the avatar, just so that we can see our avatar clearly. So I reset my 2D arrangement, and when they're all still selected, I move them out of the way, just anywhere above my avatar. And this allows you to have a really clean view of your avatar and your pattern pieces, so we can start arranging them onto our avatar. So I'm going to bring up my arrangement points by pressing Shift F for Freddy. And if you don't remember the shortcut, it's always in your avatar display as well in your toggle menu, show arrangement points. So we want to see these blue dots around our avatar. And these dots help us to arrange our pattern pieces where they should live on our avatar. So now we're going to jump between the 2D and the 3D window. So I'm going to select my pieces from the 2D pattern window, and then I'm going to arrange them in the 3D pattern window. I am going to select first the front piece of my t-shirt, and it's sat on top of the front of the shadow of the avatar in the 2D window. Will be selected up here, but they're out of the way, so we don't see them. The selection corresponds in the two windows. And I'm going to find an arrangement point that places my pattern in a good place for me. So I see that that one on her sternum, on the avatar's sternum, is the one where I need to place it. When you're working with the arrangement points, it will give you a shadow of what your pattern piece will look like once you drop it before you click and drop it into place. But you can imagine, I mean, this arrangement point is no good for a center front of a t-shirt. I don't want it on her arm either. This is a little bit too high, the one just on her neck, or just below her neck. This one on her belly is also too low. So that one, you kind of want to move your mouse around and find the right arrangement point, but it should be the same for all of us. And when we found it, we click to arrange our pattern onto the avatar. And if we rotate around the avatar, we see that it's